Hey, writers, welcome back. We're live again, and this is really exciting. I got a brand new camera. I'm really excited about that. So, today, we're going to focus on today's writing prompt, which is that we want to write a character outline for our plot. So we're going to treat our plot as if it were a character. We did this with our setting at the beginning of the month, and now we're going to do it with our plot. And there's lots of different tools you can use. However you outline your characters, you could do that. I am going to use my developing a character card, which is available in the link in the comments here, I'm going to say. Is that right? It's there on my screen. And you can grab it there. That one's completely free. We're also going to use a couple other tools that are available in my Patreon account. So if you want to subscribe to that, you can grab those. But the main one we're going to focus on is a freebie that you can grab on my website just there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat my plot as if it were a character. So what do I mean by that? Well, being a pantser for a long time, I didn't do a lot of plotting. And this past year, I tried to do a lot of plotting. But at the same time, I didn't want to overplot, because what it means to be a pantser is that we feel like if we know too much about the story, then we feel like we wrote it and we get bored. That's sort of what's going on in a pantser's brain. But recently, I have been writing like David Lynch, which I've really enjoyed, and I've found pantsing again to be a really wonderful thing, and I'm really enjoying it a lot. And there's a video about that coming up tomorrow, so click that subscribe so you don't miss that, and click the bell so you get notified. It'll be live tomorrow morning, but Australian time. Tomorrow morning Australian time. So it is 11 a.m. Australian time right now. And for those of you in North America, it is probably about 9 p.m. So trying to find a nice spot where these lives hit a nice time for everybody is hard, but I'm working on it. Anyway, so been rediscovering the pantsing, and I've decided that plantster is the best term for me, because I like to pants my outlining. And I think that that is a lot of fun, and I've been doing a lot of experimenting so that I'm ready for Preptober, because I'm going to win NaNoWriMo this year. I've done it many years, and I've never won, which is funny because I managed to write a novel in the 3-day novel writing contest. And if I can write a novel in 3 days, why can't I do it in a month? And generally, I think the reason is that when I get stuck in the muddy middle. I think that every time I write a book, I get stuck in the muddy middle. I just want to get to the end of the story. Even when I'm reading, I'm like, oh, I don't want to go through all this like trials and tribulations. I just want to get to the end. So how do I keep myself and my reader engaged in the middle is what I'm looking at right now. And so I'm just playing around, and I thought, you know what? Plot is a valid thing. We as character writers, we tend to like character-driven stories, and we want to talk about character. But at the same time, there is a lot of value in plot-driven stories, especially when you think about some of the great stories that we all love. I love Batman, and Batman is an archetypal character in that he doesn't really change from story to story. He might have an arc in any given story, but at the end of the day, he's not going to completely change. His wants and his needs have to be pretty closely aligned, because if he learns something, that's fine, but it can't alter the fact that he's Batman. He can't hang up the cape and cowl because he's just going to pick it up again because he's not going anywhere. Same with Sherlock Holmes. He may grow a little bit, he may learn a little bit, but at the end of the day, he's going to still be Sherlock Holmes. So it's very, very hard to do that with those archetypal characters. So you have to focus a lot more on plot and your promises with that. And so I want to just look at that sort of thing in this story. So I am writing a ghost story. If you've been following along, you know that I'm writing a humorous ghost story, and I'm not sure it's turning out funny. I wish it were a little funnier than it is. But it's a monster in the house. And what I mean by that is it's another term for that is labyrinth. It's a closed circuit, which is atypical for a horror story. I don't know that this is really horror, but I'm sort of playing with that genre a little bit and having some of those tropes. And when you have a horror story, you want your characters not to be able to escape. So I have made it a loop, a literal loop, in that I have a character called Loopy, because I'm silly, who is a ghost that creates a loop, a time loop, or a energy loop, or I'm not exactly sure how to define it, but basically certain characters can't leave. And I've set it in a hospital, a long-term hospital facility in country New South Wales, sort of loosely based off of a real facility located near me, but not actually that facility, because this one is, silly with ghosts, as my main character says, and or chock-a-block. So my plot is I think if my plot were a archetypal character, it would be a every hero. And the reason I think that, and I'm going off the if you're downloading it from my Patreon account, it's the elements of character worksheet I'm going off of. There's a link to the video that's a partner to that in the comments if you want to grab that later and watch that and know what I mean by that. But basically, what I'm looking at is whether my plot has any agency, if it's likable, or if it's got competence. And how do I define that? Well, because it's Monster in the House, I'm going to personify my plot as a house, or in this case, a hospital. And so it is competent at doing what it's doing. And I think it's likable. Not quite as likable as competent as hospitals tend to be. But it doesn't have any agency because it's being controlled by this loop. So I have put it in the every category, which is sort of where we find Cinderella or Elisa from Gargoyles. Love Gargoyles. We talked last week about the Xanatos Gambit, and Elisa is a main character in that cartoon, and she is an every character, an every hero. And so I feel like I put my plot somewhere there. So I'm going to go over here. And so now that I've made that decision, I'm going to go to the page 3 of my worksheet, which is my hero, or in this case, who is my plot. As I said, I'm going to personify my plot as a house, as a hospital, as a monster in the house. So how might you personify your plot? There are different monster in the house. I wrote mouse. I wrote mouse again. Oh, the joys of being dyslexic. So there are different kinds of plot. You've got your rags to riches. You have your heist stories, your if it's a romance, friends to lovers, not villains, but enemies to lovers, or lovers to enemies, which I would be more interested in. I don't like a love story, but you can grab those kinds of ideas, and maybe I'll do a video on the different kinds of plots that there are. That might be an interesting thing to look at. But there are lots of videos on YouTube about that. If you don't know what that is, it's going to be really hard to know any more about your plot than if you don't know what the archetypal plot is. So far I've looked at what the archetypal of my plot would be if it were a character, and I've also looked at the archetypal plot, or the archetypal plot it would be as a plot. So it's a monster in the house story. So I'm going to call it the house rather than the monster, because the monster is my antagonist, and we looked at my antagonist's backup plan using the Xanatos Gambit last week in this live from last week. So that would be a good thing to do. My watch is vibrating at me. Sorry I sound funny. I've lost my voice, but I'm still here and I'm still going. So if this house were a character, if my monster in my house plot were a character, I would want to know its wants, its greatest fear or misbelief, and its need. So I'm going to think about those things right now. And I'm not sure how helpful this is going to be. I'm just experimenting, and I love that you're experimenting with me. This is so much fun. And this is what I think it means to be a plantster, is that we experiment with plotting. A true plotter would have a set way that they do things, and they do the same thing every single time. Whereas a plantster will plot an outline, but sort of as the muse leads, or as they feel like it, or as they think the story needs. So how you do your plotting for the current work in progress may not be the same as you do it for the next. And basically what I'm trying to do right now is to try as many things as possible, because I want to succeed at NaNoWriMo, and I am creating a daily to-do list for Preptober, and that's going to be available in my Patreon at the end of September. And it's going to be a list of all the different things that we'll do every day in Preptober to get ready for NaNoWriMo. And I want it to be as I want it to be extremely helpful, but I also want it to be as strong in different kind of avenues, so that to avoid writer's block in November. So if my plot is this house, is this hospital, what's its want? Well, I think like most of the characters in and I did this when I looked at it as a setting. Most of the characters, I think what it wants is to be free of the ghosts, is to be free of the loop. I think that's what it wants. I feel like that's what the plot wants. That's what the reader wants as well. It's another way to look at it is, what is your SAM? This is a term from StoryGrid. Your single audience member, SAM. What do they want? And what do they want from the story? So the promise I make at the beginning of the story is that Scylla, my main character, and her sister S will leave the hospital. That's the promise I'm making at the beginning of the story. So that's my plot, is they're trying to get out. So that is the core want and the core drive of my story. It's another way the Duffer Brothers call it, the drive of the story is to get out. And I feel like my plot wants that as well. And I think that is kind of a key thing if you're writing a straightforward story. I mean, you can always play with these things, but you need to know the rules before you can break them, I think. That's what I felt. That's what I was taught in art school, that Picasso said when I was 5, I could draw like Raphael or paint like Raphael, but it took me all my life to learn how to paint like a child. And basically what he's saying is that once you know the rules, and you can break the rules. So you have to do a still life before you can do an abstract. And so I feel that way about writing as well, that what you need to know the rules of story before you can break them, because you need to know why you're breaking them. And I think that pantsers sometimes don't like rules. They feel like it's constricting. But I feel like the rules are tools. More, I don't like the term rules. I like the term tools, because what happens is when I get stuck, in the past, I would just start again. It's funny. I think Tolkien was a pantser, because he did, like, there's no word of lie that he did so much outlining and prep, and he knew his world inside and out, but he did not plot. And he would write, like, I heard it described as waves on the shore. So he'd write and he'd get a little ways and he'd get stuck and he'd just scrap it and start again. He wouldn't cut and paste and rework. He would just throw it out and start again. And he would get a little further and then he would get stuck and he would start again. And I have written so many books that way. And I'm tired of writing books that way. I want my first go at it to actually, I want to have a first draft at the end of my first go. I want my zero draft to turn into my first draft. I don't want like a 3.0 to turn into my first draft and start getting edited, which has been what's gone on in the past. I've rewritten everything so many times. So what is the misbelief? Now, I think if I'm looking at from Sam's perspective, from my single audience mentor's perspective, the misbelief is, spoilers, that they're going to get out. That's the misbelief, that both of them getting out is a happy ending, and both of them leaving the hospital is a happy ending. And I don't think that's the case. I think that Scylla needs to let her sister have her own journey, and she needs to focus on her journey, because Scylla is my main character, so we'll focus on what she needs. S needs something else. But so Scylla's need is the need of the plot, and the need of the single audience member. And that'll be my cathartic ending, in that they will need to let things not end. That it isn't just about getting out, it's about being better and being themselves. So next page of this workbook. What is this character? Why why is this character the hero? So I look at this in a lot of different workbooks, in different ways. I think this is an extremely important character, or extremely important point, is why this story? Why this character for this story? Why this setting for this story? Why this story now? And this is an extremely important question. The way I word it in this workbook is, could you drop any other hero into the story and tell it exactly the same? And if the answer is yes, you've got a problem. That's what I think. If you can take any hero from the DC universe and plop them into a Batman story, it's not a Batman story. It might be a Justice League story, but it's not a Batman story. Batman story has to have certain elements that only Batman can solve those. If you can punch through a wall and solve the problem, if you were Superman, that's boring, unless you're maybe exploring the idea that Batman isn't strong and he's got to find another way to do it. But if you can plop any other hero into the story that plays out exactly the same, then it's boring. It's not interesting at all. And vice versa. If you can tell a Superman story where you can plop any other hero, you can plop Green Lantern in there, or you can plop Martian Manhunter in there, or anything like that, and it can work, then it's not a good story. It needs to be unique to those characters and unique to that setting and unique to you. So why this story? Why the story now? Why not another story? Why did I decide to write a ghost story? I actually was inspired by Nancy Drew, the new CW TV show. I grew up with Nancy Drew, and I was extremely confused because I didn't know they were going a different way. And I was watching the pilot and I was expecting all of the ghost stuff and all the supernatural stuff, like in a Sherlock or a Nancy Drew, to be explained away by some logic, some logical force. The same way all that supernatural stuff traditionally in old classic Sherlock Holmes stories and in old Nancy Drew stories was explained away with logic. It wasn't, they weren't supernatural stories. Sometimes they thought they were going to be, and then they weren't, like the Hounds of the Baskerville. But at the end of the day, or at the end of the episode, I went, that is a ghost. I am seeing a ghost. How are they going to explain that away? They can't explain that away. If they explain that away, the show's just up the chart. So I was very confused because I didn't know that they were telling a ghost story. But then I was compelled. I found it really compelling and I really enjoyed it. But I was really disappointed because the character I was most interested in was one of the ghosts. And at the end of season 1, that ghost moves on. And I was really sad. I've kept going and I still enjoy the show. I still enjoy the characters. But I miss, there's something special that happened in season 1 where there was this ghost that I really cared about. And it was really interesting to me. And I'm like, okay, so and we're going to look at this on Friday in a video about looking at story and even stuff you like and what will you do differently. And that's a really good place to start. We'll look at this on Friday to find your own story and find your own ideas of what could be. So I went, okay, I want to write a ghost story, but I want the ghost I want the ghost to be as important as the other characters. And excuse me. I didn't know how that was going to play out. And then I was at the Iceland Writers Retreat and I knew I wanted to write this ghost story and I knew I wanted it to be tongue-in-cheek because that's my style. I like to write sort of bizarro Lynchian kind of stuff, which is actually why I tried writing like Lynch. I like that sort of strange mixed with the mundane and things not going exactly as you think they will and subverting tropes. I love that. So I was like, what can I write a funny ghost story? Is it possible? And I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know when I'm done because I've hit the muddy middle or the end of I'm at the beginning of the I've written so much this week writing like Lynch. You've got to watch that video tomorrow. It's been so great. I highly recommend writing like Lynch if you're a plantster. Don't forget there's a pantser in you as well, not just a plotter. If you're a plantster. So, and I had, and oh my goodness, it's been so great. Anyway, I'm at the beginning of the third act. I'm using the third act story structure, and I'm at the beginning of the third act. I think it's hard because I was filling in some of the middle, and then I've been writing by hand, so I haven't gone back to the manuscript on my computer, and there might be bits I'm missing to connect things together because I've not looked at it, but I will have to sit down and do that. But if I am successful when I finish this, I will have written a funny ghost story, which I'm really excited about. I want my audience, I want my Sam to think, am I scared? Am I not scared? Or do I laugh or do I like shudder? So that is something really important to me. And so it had to be a ghost story. And to write a compelling ghost story, it needs to be in a loop. They need to be trapped. So the plot had to be a circular plot. It had to be a hero's journey. It had to be a circle. It had to be a loop. It had to be enclosed. They can't get away. It can't be an epic journey. You can't tell an epic journey that's a ghost story because if you can escape the monster, then there's no fear. So it couldn't be that. So Thing of the Stuff is an epic journey where they travel really far because they're not being chased by, well, they are being chased by monsters, but the monsters it's a race to the finish line with the monsters. So whereas this one is trying to escape the monster, and in that it had to be a monster in the house. So that's a very long way of saying that, yes, this story had to be this story, and all the elements of the story had to be it. The next question here is, what is the unique gift that your hero has that will enable them to succeed or force them to fail in the end? So this is a story grid based question, which I think is really valid. And if we're looking at it from a sense of plot, that obviously the unique element of this plot is that it is circular, it is a trap, it is enclosed. So it needs to either break so they can get out, or it needs to close in on them. And that's the gift, is that it's circular. So we need to either break the gift or we need to keep it closed. And that is the last question in this workbook. So let me know if that was helpful. I'm actually it was good to think about these things, I think, for me, and to realize that I'm on the right track and to know why I'm writing the story again, especially now that I'm going into the ending payoff. Make sure that all my themes and my thoughts about the plot are still on track. So I'm it's a shorter one today, but I'm going to wrap it up there. And thank you so much for joining me on this journey. And please hit that like and subscribe button if this was helpful at all. And the replay will be up soon. Thank you. Bye. Oh, keep writing.